market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. European stocks rising. Traders looking forward to the final set of U.S. economic data that could determine the size of tomorrow's Fed cut. Joining us now, Eva Sun-Wai, a fund manager at Mgmt and Venram from Bloomberg MLive. It's exciting. I think it's exciting, right? I don't know if it's a 20 or 50 basis point cut that we'll get. But, Eva, what are you expecting markets to do on the back of it?
Yeah, it's fascinating. You know, we've not had such uncertainty in terms of the size of such a move in, I think, 15 years, where markets haven't priced exactly either 25 or 50 basis points. You know, I think the rhetoric and the narrative from the Fed will be almost as important as the move itself. For example, they could still do 25, but then, you know, drive a narrative that future cuts will be more aggressive. I think it would be more palatable in a way for them to start with 50 and then go to 25 rather than the other way around, so that they're not seen as being behind the curve and having to catch up. But yeah, it's a really interesting time in terms of markets not knowing which one's coming.
Yeah, it certainly is. Ven, do you think the Fed is behind the curve?
Well, it does definitely. The fact that we're even having a discussion about a 50 basis point possibility suggests that the Fed ought to have gone with a rate cut in July. And that suggests that they are behind the curve. And there is a bit of panic looking at all the media reports setting up the markets to expect a bigger size move. But the key question for the markets, Francine, is where the terminal rate is. And I think that the markets are kind of too aggressive in pricing the Fed trajectory, which I don't think is going to happen, which I don't think is going to materialize, I beg your pardon.
And so, Ven, why not? We're speaking also from someone, you know, the head of research at JP Morgan, and they're expecting 50 this week, then 50 actually the next time, and then a 25 basis point cut in December. It is quite aggressive.
Extremely, because if you look at the Fed under Powell, one, it's a consensus-driven beast. So that suggests that bringing everyone on board for a 50 basis point initial move seems that the bar is going to be high. The second factor is, if you look at the Fed's hiking cycle back in March 2022, they started with a small move, 25 basis points. By the time they got down to the next meeting, it was 50 basis points. And then it was followed by 4 back-to-back 75 basis point moves. So the Fed seems to want to start small and go big. And I think that's what I would expect them to do, not the other way around.
Eva, when you look at some of the trajectory going forward, then what will support some of the fixed income markets and FX?
Yeah, you know, I think this is going to be crucial for the dollar, for sure. I think markets have sort of accepted over summer a weaker dollar story, and that has obviously buoyed some of your lower yielding currencies in the G10, the Japanese yen being the big one, that having driven a lot of volatility over August. You know, I think going forward, it's important to see whether this is a prolonged weaker dollar story, or actually we're seeing that soft landing materialise, the Fed actually being reasonably successful in loosening conditions while still achieving a reasonably buoyant economy, and actually the dollar remaining reasonably stable from there. So I think it has, you know, multiple implications and definitely sets the tone for other central banks to follow.
What does that mean, Eva, in terms of the entry points for some of the markets? If you look at some of the currency pairings, if you look at some of the treasuries, when's the ideal time to get in?
I mean, I think at the moment what seems more attractive is curve views. If you look at the US Treasury curve, for example, we're still seeing an inverted or, you know, very flat curve, and actually positioning at the front end seems reasonably sensible when you consider that whether we get a slowdown story or if we just get more loose monetary conditions, actually the front end seems a reasonable place to be. If you also assume we need more term premium at the back end of the curve, the fiscal story is still, you know, looking a little bit bleak at the back end of the curve. So I think there's a lot of entry points at the front end of the curve at this point.
Ven, what's your take on a good entry point when you look at some of the opportunities out there? I think sometimes maybe we forget to really mention China and how difficult the trajectory there could be.
Absolutely. Talking about Treasury still, Francine, I think that the entry point is actually for the front end. We have rallied a whole lot. The 2 years rallied 120, has fallen 120 basis points so far this quarter. That's phenomenal. We have never seen that kind of a drop outside of a systemic distress, i.e. the financial crisis or even the first wave of the pandemic. I think that the markets are kind of run ahead of themselves, and I think that there is scope for a correction just after the Fed. As for China, I think that yields are going to go lower because the economy needs that kind of support. There is over-reliance on the property market, and I think that yields have to adjust lower for the economy to be revived.
I mean, the BOJ will also give us quite a lot of excitement. Eva, what are you expecting?
Well, I mean, we got a lot of excitement over summer. I actually expect this week to be reasonably quiet from the BOJ. There's discussions about October or even, a January future hike. I think they'll likely be reasonably quiet this week, and I think more will rely on the US story and what happens with the dollar in terms of the yen. But, we have just had our most recent wage numbers coming in, and we're still at about 3%. And I think the signs are positive in terms of the continued trajectory of the Bank of Japan needing to continue those rate hikes, understanding that there is a domestic inflation story, a wage pressure story, and actually that looks pretty positive for the yen going forward, less so for JGBs and the government bond curve and equity markets we know are struggling to absorb the, potentially weak export story. But I think the picture is becoming clearer in Japan, which I think is positive for investors.
Ven, the $1 million trillion question, how much of the carry trade is still left to be unwound?
Sorry, there's some noise going on here. Can I hear that question again? Sorry.
I was asking the difficult question, Ven, about the carry trade and what happens there and how much is there still left to be unwound?
I think there is plenty still to be unwound, because if you look at the yen, I think it is at 140 against the dollar. There is still a lot of carry trade invoiced in there. And I think that in a more reasonable level for the yen, where you would think that the carry trades have been fully unwound, is around 115 to 118 per dollar. And I think that until that yen recovers to that stage, I think there are some still plenty of carry trades to be unwound. And I don't think they have been fully unwound yet. Part of the reason is the market's complacency about the BOJ's trajectory. If you look at OIS markets, they are barely pricing in any rate hikes from the BOJ, even by June next year, which I think is extreme complacency, which is also reflected in the yen's cheapness.
Eva, I mean, again, if you look at all of that, is the market prepared, or could we see big volatility bounce like we had in August?
Well, I think, we're now seeing a bit of a different story in that the yen is still strengthening, but volatility has come down, which I think is a positive thing. I think markets have absorbed, that initial correction and actually are now just seeing more of a steady trajectory for the yen going forward. Broadly, I think it's a positive thing. And I think the entry points are still attractive. The yen is still cheap on a long-term basis, especially if you look at real effective exchange rates, and compared to other trading partners, we're still seeing an attractive entry point here for the yen. And I think going forward, it's, a positive story. OK, a positive story.
Ven, talk to me about Bank of England. I mean, when you look at some of the machinations of Bank of England and what we can expect, the UK seems to be in a slightly stronger position than most G7 countries, apart from the US. What does that mean for monetary policy?
I think that the Bank of England, we should expect the Bank of England to perhaps go at a faster rate of rate cuts next year, perhaps not this year, because they are still waiting for good news on services inflation. And tomorrow we get a print where we expect the whisper number is that the services inflation is going to be higher than what the markets are expecting. So I think that, the BOE is going to be cautious heading into the year end. But after next year, after the start of 2025, I think they will loosen policy a lot more. One of the reasons to expect that is that the real policy rate for the BOE is remarkably high, next only to the Fed. So I think that there is plenty of wiggle room for the BOE to cut rates should inflation cooperate, and that should is a big issue.
Eva, how do if you look at gilts versus treasuries, how do they track?
I actually think long-term gilts look pretty attractive at the moment, both on an outright basis and versus US Treasuries. Since we've seen a bit more of a correction in the Treasury curve, we haven't seen such aggressive rallying from the gilt curve. And actually, the gilt curve, especially at the long end, looks relatively steep compared to some of its, competitors. And so actually, I think the entry points for long-term gilts, especially, when you consider the likelihood of the Bank of England perhaps being more dovish than markets pricing. There's room for sterling to potentially weaken. We're likely going to see the end of those upward surprises in UK growth. And so I would expect that picture to start to shift a little, and actually gilts on a relative basis are looking more attractive.
There you go. Thank you both for joining us. Eva Sun-Wai, a fund manager at M&G, and Van Ram from Bloomberg Live. Now, coming up, Intel surges pre-market on news of a deal to make AI chips for Amazon. We'll have the details next, and this is Bloomberg. So Intel shares have surged in pre-market trading after announcing a deal to make AI chips for Amazon. Well, Bloomberg Daybreak anchor Tom McKenzie is all over the story. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this feels like a huge, very significant deal.
It is. Look, we've been reporting on the bad news that's been hitting Intel in recent months as Pat Gelsinger tries to reposition this company and focus on foundries. Now they have this major customer, so absolutely, this is a really big deal. AWS and Intel will be working together on their own customized AI chip. And this was on the back of a three-day board meeting last week, really, really crucial board meeting at Intel, where they were working out how to contend with the cost pressures. We know that they're going to be cutting about 15,000 headcount. They also said, this is really important for Europe as well, that they're going to be pausing the build-out of their factories and foundries in both Germany and Poland. They will keep the ones in the US on track. But this is a really important signal. AWS pairing up with Intel, and it suggests to other potential customers out there that Intel does have the prospects, does have the team, does have the intel to be able to work through on some of these high-end chips. So they will certainly be using this as a sell as they try to keep this program on track.
So, Tom, the other story is basically Microsoft, giving back to shareholders. Do some of these other companies have to work a little bit harder to keep shareholders happy?
Yeah, look, Microsoft, along with OpenAI, and of course they have that partnership, and NVIDIA has been one of the key winners, of course, of generative AI. So they have the balance sheet that maybe the likes of Pat Gelsinger would envy. They have about $75 billion on their balance sheet, cash and equivalents. So what they're coming out with then is that share buyback, the largest on record, matching the previous record, so in line with that, $60 billion US, upping the dividend as well by 10% on the dividend. So the 10% dividend, so they're getting 83 cents, and that will be kicking in from November versus 75 cents. The stock buyback about 60 billion. And again, they have this cash balance sheet that allows them to do this, one of the key beneficiaries of the upside that's come through from Gen AI with products like Copilot that they've successfully, at least for now, been selling to their customers.
Yeah. OK, so Amazon said you can no longer work from home.
Yeah.
I had to take a double take. I was like, people still work from home?
I know. Shock horror. For us, this has long been the case, of course. But for Amazon, in the tech world, this has been a point of contention with employees saying, look, we've got this, we've rebalanced our lives around this. We want to be able to work from home at least a couple of days a week. Amazon taking a firm line on this. Andy Jassy saying that we need to get innovation back into the business. We need to act like a startup again. The context is about 1.5 million employees, of course, working for Amazon, the vast majority of whom do not have the luxury of working from home because they work in their warehouses. But about 300,000 to 350,000 office workers will be impacted by this. And again, it's part of Andy Jassy's plans to reinvigorate what he says and get the start back feel back into this business. We'll see if and to what extent employees push back on this.
Yeah, let's see. Success is always difficult to measure in the first couple of weeks when employees actually said, well, no, I've arranged my life this way. Let me stay working from home. Tom, thank you so much. As always, Tom McKenzie there with the main stories, of course, Intel, Microsoft and Amazon. Coming up, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen prepares to unveil her new top team. We'll have a look at who's in the running. That's next, and this is Bloomberg.
We will only be able to do that if we design a bold industrial strategy with innovation and investment at its heart. So to a certain extent, it's not preserving the old, but via innovation and investment, really embracing the new. We need to boost European cohesion and regions to take everyone along. And for that, we need to support people. We need to develop skills. and all this founded on our excellent social model. Finally, this was a lot looking at the European Union, but of course we have to ensure that Europe can assert its interests and lead in the world, so the external dimension plays also a very important role. And these priorities are reflected in the titles of the executive vice presidents, which I will present in a moment. There's another principle. The treaty says very clearly each member of the college is equal, and each commissioner has an equal responsibility to deliver on our priorities. That means that all commissioners must work together, and it is in this spirit that each executive vice president will also have a portfolio to focus on, for which they will have to work with other commissioners. So in simple words, what affects security also affects the economy. What affects climate or environment also affects people, and vice versa, the business community, and you can go on with that. This is also the reason why this time we do not have the extra layer of vice presidents. So we have a leaner structure and a more interactive and interlinked structure. Another topic is balance in general, be it gender balance, be it the balance of the different topics, but of course also geography. As you will see, we now have 11 women as candidates for the college that I will present today. That is 40%, a share of 40%. When I received the first nominations, and I looked at the whole pattern and the whole tableau, we were at a point where we had a share of 22% women and 78% men. So you can imagine that this was completely unacceptable. So I worked intensively with the member states, and we were able to improve the share to 40% women and 60% men. And it shows that as much as we have achieved, there is still so much more work to do. And with that in mind, I assigned 6 executive vice presidents. The next slide, please. The 6 executive vice presidents, and actually at the very end you get the overall tableau with all the names and all the portfolios. So you'll get it all. 6 executive vice presidents. I assigned 4 women and 2 men. So you recall the share of the college is 40% women, 60% men. We flipped this, and we have as a proposal 6 executive vice presidents, 4 women, 2 men. If you look at the geographical balance, 3 are from member states that joined before the fall of the Iron Curtain. 3 are from member states that joined after Europe was reunited. From the Baltics, the Nordics, and Eastern Europe. We have ministers and prime ministers, very different backgrounds, with one common goal, and that is to make Europe stronger. So, allow me to introduce them, and please the next slide. The first executive vice president will be Teresa Ribera, responsible for a clean, just and competitive transition. She will also be responsible for the competition policy. So she has the competition portfolio. She will guide the work to ensure that Europe stays on track for its goals set out in the European Green Deal, and that we decarbonize and industrialize our economy at the same time. Next slide, please. Henna Virkkunen will be the Executive Vice President for Tech Sovereignty, Security and Democracy. She will also be responsible for the portfolio of digital and frontier technologies. I will ask Henna to look at the internal and external aspects of security. but also to strengthen the foundations of our democracy, such as the rule of law, and protect it whenever it comes under attack. Next slide, please. Stéphane Séjourné will be the Executive Vice President for Prosperity and Industrial Strategy. He will also be responsible for the industry, SMEs, and the single market portfolio. He will guide the work to put in place the conditions for our companies to thrive, for investment and innovation, to economic stability and trade and economic security. Next slide, please. Kaja Kallas, as you already know, will be our High Representative and Vice President. We are in an era of geostrategic rivalries and instability. Our foreign and security policy must be designed with this reality in mind, and it must be more aligned with our own interests. I know that I can count on her to bring all this together and be the bridge between our internal and our external policies, and to ensure that we have a geopolitical commission. Next slide, please. I'm very happy to entrust the role of Executive Vice President for People, Skills and Preparedness to Roxana Minzatu. She will have the portfolio responsibility for skills, education and quality jobs and social rights. This is under the umbrella of a union of skills and the European Pillar of Social Rights. She will focus on those areas which are crucial to unite our society. Next slide, please. Raffaele Fitto will be the Executive Vice President for Cohesion and Reforms. He will be responsible for the portfolio dealing with cohesion policy, regional development and cities. We will draw on his extensive experience to help modernize and strengthen our cohesion investments and growth policies. This is the team of executive vice presidents which will work hand in hand with each other and with all commissioners. Next slide, please. I would like to introduce them all to you. So I need the next slide. Yeah, there we are. We go one by one. I will start here with Maroš Šefčovič. Next slide, please. Maroš Šefčovič. I'm very happy to give him two roles. He will be the Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security. This is a new portfolio, which also includes customs policy. I have also entrusted him with a second role, the Commissioner for Interinstitutional Relations and Transparency, and for this second role, he will report directly to me. Next slide, please. Valdis Dombrovskis will also have a double role. He will be the Commissioner for Economy and Productivity. I have also given him the role of Commissioner for Implementation and Simplification. He will there also report directly to me on this part of his work. Next slide, please. Dubravka Šuica will be the Commissioner for the Mediterranean. I'm entrusting her with this new role. She will also be responsible for the wider southern neighbourhood. She will work closely with Kaja Kallas and many other commissioners to develop our shared interest with the region, and she will be responsible for the portfolio of demography. Next slide, please. Oliver Vaheli will be the Commissioner for Health and Animal Welfare. He will be responsible for building a European health union and continuing the work of beating cancer and on preventive health. Next slide, please. Wopke Hoekstra will be the Commissioner for Climate, Net Zero and Clean Growth. He will continue to work on implementation and adaptation, on climate diplomacy and decarbonisation, and he will also be responsible for taxation. Next slide, please. Andrius Kubilius will be the Commissioner for Defence and Space. He will work on developing the European Defence Union and boosting our investment and industrial capacity. Next slide, please. Marta Kos. It should be noted that the government of Slovenia has suggested Marta Kos as a member of the college. The nomination procedure, which involves the consultation of the national parliament for a non-binding opinion, is ongoing. She will be Commissioner for Enlargement, also responsible for the Eastern neighbourhood, and she will work on supporting Ukraine and continuing the work on reconstruction and support the candidate countries to prepare for their accession. Next slide, please. Josef Sikela will be the Commissioner for International Partnerships. He will lead the important work on our big investment programme, Global Gateway, for infrastructure abroad. He will ensure that we develop mutual beneficial partnerships which invest heavily in a common future. Next slide, please. Kostas Kadis will be the Commissioner for Fisheries and Oceans. I count on his experience to help build a resilient, competitive and sustainable sector and present the first European Oceans Pact. Next slide, please.
Well, that was, of course, the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announcing her new European commissioners after a meeting with the presidents of political groups of the European Parliament. Now, it's interesting to see she has the appointment of 6 new executive vice presidents. That means that certain countries will have key portfolios. France, I know there's been a lot of controversy about the French proposal. There's been a lot of copy written on maybe her antipathy on some of the initial proposals, but they seem to be getting a good job. Then everything has to be approved by the Parliament. Valdis Dombrovskis to be EU Commissioner for the Economy, Maros Sefcovic to be EU Commissioner for Trade. So for more on all of this, to understand exactly what the Commission will do next, some of the priorities for Ursula von der Leyen, let's get straight to Bloomberg's Oliver Crook. Ollie, I mean, the key takeaways are what?
Yeah, there's a lot to get through, as you say, Francine, as you suggest. So one of the things that is very critical here is that she's basically changed the entire structure of the commission. She's done away from the vice president roles, which, you know, initially the last commission there were 3 executive vice presidents and then a ton of vice presidents. Now there are only executive vice presidents. There are 6 of those now. So they've doubled the number of executive vice presidents, and we'll go through them because they have just named them. That and they're all sort of different than they were previously. So there's one that is on the clean, just, competitive transition. That is going to Ribera. That is going to Spain. And that is basically what is going to contain this competition portfolio, which is something that she's talked a lot about and is very attached to the Draghi report. There is also the executive vice president, as you just mentioned, Stéphane Séjourné, which was all the sort of controversy over the last 24 hours. He is getting the one on prosperity industrial strategy. This is also going to be connected to what Mario Draghi was working with. This also seems to be somewhat similar to the former job of Thierry Breton in terms of the sort of internal single market, but really trying to make the conditions in which for companies to thrive. So I think for the business community, this is going to be a very crucial role. Kaja Kallas is getting foreign affairs. That we already knew. Finland is going to get tech sovereignty. Cohesion and reforms goes to Italy, and then space skills and education to Romania. Those are the executive vice president roles. Now there are other sub roles, and these are influential people, as we know. There's the one on trade, which is going to go to Sefcovic, as you just mentioned. That is a role that will report directly into Ursula von der Leyen. We have also on the economy and productivity, as well as implementation and simplification, which will be sort of very welcome words to much of the business community. That is going to be Dombrovskis, again, going to be reporting directly into Ursula von der Leyen. And then I just found sort of interesting here as the last one, Francine, there's now a Defense and Space Commission, which is obviously something that we've talked about a lot. The last time there was a commission was in 2019. They didn't really have to worry so much about defense as there wasn't a war in Ukraine. That is now going to be headed by the Lithuanians, and this is all going to be sort sort of front and center when we talk about joint spending for procurement for military gear, all of these sorts of things. And as you mentioned, Francine, this will all now go to the parliament. This needs to get voted on. And Ursula von der Leyen is hoping to bring this new structure into power in November. So just the headlines here again, there are no vice presidents anymore. There are now 6 instead of 3 executive vice presidents. And we've just gone through all of the job titles there.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, just putting this together is probably a mess because we know that von der Leyen spent, weeks trying to put this together. You basically have competing demands from political parties, you have the governments, and then you need to make sure that this gets approved internally for the countries, and then, of course, at the whole European Parliament level. Ali, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Oliver Crook there with the very latest on some of these key roles in this new EU team for Ursula von der Leyen, where we understand that France, Italy, and Spain win some of the most pivotal roles. Now back to the markets, and the dollar steady after a 4-day decline as investors wait for a U.S. retail sales report that may influence the Fed's rate decision tomorrow. Let's discuss all of this with Sonja Marten, head of FX and monetary policy at DZ Bank, and Aline Oyamada, Bloomberg's editor for Europe, FX and rates. Sonja and Aline, thank you so much for joining us. Sonja, let's kick it off with you. I mean, this is a big week. This would be the first cut from the Fed in 5 years. I don't know whether you see some funny positioning ahead of that.
Yes, the market has been speculating massively on how much of a rate cut we're going to get tomorrow. For a while, the market priced in 50 basis points and went back down to 25. Now we're back up to almost 50 basis points. And there's a whopping 120 basis points in rate cuts priced in by the end of the year. So markets are definitely positioned for an aggressive move by the Fed tomorrow. I suspect they're going to be disappointed, but that is what the market is now looking for. So anything less than 50 is going to be a disappointment to many people.
Aline, I guess if they do 50 basis points, I mean, is it an admission that they're behind the curve?
Well, I think some might see it that way, but for the Fed, it will be kind of front-loading that pace and trying to show they are not late to this party. So I think at this point, it's much of a psychological game. Like if we do 50 now, will the market expect 50 and 50 and 50 toward the end of the year, which maybe is not that desirable for policymakers. But yeah, with the market so split, that means that any way we go, we'll have a big market reaction, right?
Yeah, I mean, we are expecting quite a big market reaction. Sonja, when you look at, I mean, why do you think the market is ahead of themselves? There is, this being priced in not only 50 this week, but, 50 possibly in October, and then even 25 in December. I mean, that's a lot of tightening in a very short amount of space.
Yes, that is a big move for the Fed, and I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't think it's necessary. I mean, I think what's happened is that the market sort of jumped the gun on the whole recession story in the U.S. I mean, the economy is finally slowing down. I mean, this is what the Fed was working towards for a long time, and it took much longer to happen than expected. But now finally we have the slowdown. That's what we wanted. We wanted the labor market to cool, inflation to come down. It's happening. The Fed can cut rates. But we're not in a recession, and the Fed doesn't expect a recession. So there's no reason to jump the gun and do 120 basis points by the end of the year. I actually think that if the Fed did suggest that they're about to do that, that would create more uncertainty in the market. And I think that's not what the Fed will want to risk doing.
Yeah, but there are worries, Alina, for example, about the labor market, right, which is partly the reason why we think they're loosening by so much. Is there a concern that actually the markets have forgotten about inflation? I mean, there's always a possibility that inflation comes back up. And so we have this environment where actually the Fed, if not panic, needs to reverse course quite quickly.
Yeah, I think inflation is always a risk. But at this very point, everyone is very confident that the direction of travel for inflation is downwards, and that game is kind of won. So they're focusing on the labor market, which has been a bigger market driver for that specific reason. And the whole debate is really, does the labor market really calls for a big cut now? Or, like Sonja said, we are not yet in a recession, so we can afford a smaller cut now and see how it goes, right?
Where do you see, Sonja, the biggest opportunities in terms of markets right now?
Well, I do think, when you look at the euro-dollar, for example, I do think at the levels that we have been trading at recently, sort of 111, 112, I think the euro is definitely too high. The dollar is, I think, a bit too weak here. So I think there is a chance here we're gonna see a correction. I'm not convinced, to be honest, though, that would happen tomorrow, even if the Fed only does 25. I have this feeling that sentiment is very negative towards the US right now. And I think even if the Fed only does 25, the market isn't going to immediately go with its expectation that more bigger cuts are going to come. And I think we're going to need some fundamental data to, especially as Aline just said, because of the labor market. So what we'll need to see is that the labor market isn't about to fall off a cliff. We haven't seen, people aren't getting fired. I mean, the labor market has relaxed a bit, and there's definitely a change there, but it's not as I think as dramatic as the market fears. And I think we're going to need to see evidence, and I think we could see quite a correction in dollar sentiment at this point, and therefore the dollar as well.
So, Sonja, what's your take on BOJ? Again, there's I guess, quite a lot of anxiousness because of what happened early August when it comes to BOJ, but also unwinding of the carry trade.
Well, we're looking for more rate hikes, but not now. I think at the moment, probably more towards the end of the year, December. If they're very, very hawkish on Friday, then that might change. We might have to push forward the timeline. But I think they'll tread carefully also because the yen has appreciated quite a lot. It's causing some concern within Japan, export sector, et cetera. We've heard some voices there, discussing the appreciation of the yen and the speed at which it's happened as a problem factor. So they'll want to tread carefully, but they are obviously on course to hike rates further. They've made that very clear.
All right. Thank you both for joining us. Sonja, Marten there from DZ Bank and Bloomberg's Aline Oyamada. It's going to be a busy week. It's going to be a fun week, right, Aline?
Absolutely.
Very fun. Coming up, Iraq's prime minister tells Bloomberg that U.S. troops are no longer needed in his country. We'll have more from our exclusive interview with him next. And this is Bloomberg.
My government started a government-run program that was proposed to Parliament and put to a vote after the ministerial cabinet presented it. This was according to the constitutional measures. Part of the ministerial program was ending the coalition's mission after the justifications for its presence had ended. Today, Iraq in 2024 is not the same as Iraq of 2014. We have defeated Daesh with our sacrifices and the Iraqi people's position from all of its components and factions, and with the support of the international community and friends, and we do appreciate that. We found that the justifications ended, and there is no longer a need for a coalition of 86 countries. We moved from a period of wars to a period of stability. Daesh doesn't pose a threat to the state. It may be part of the security challenges like drug trade and criminal offenses. It's at that level. It's not equal to Daesh now. A group of terrified people hiding in caves, in the desert, in the mountains, and a real threat to security and stability. Based on this vision and evaluation, we initiated a conversation with our friends in the international coalition, and it was honest and included more discussions on various levels and was culminated with my visit to Washington, D.C. and talking to President Biden. We formed a joint committee in August of 2023 between military commanders to start the conversation, and in fact, the committee reached an understanding to arrange for that withdrawal. It was hoped that the conclusion would be announced, but out of our keenness not to mix things or create a misunderstanding about the end of the coalition's mission, the desire was to postpone the announcement, and we hope to announce it soon. And we will take part in an international conference for the coalition against Daesh or terrorism, and Iraq is a genuine member that lead the ranks to face terrorism. Ending the coalition's mission, and this is an important point, does not mean a breakdown between Iraq and the coalition countries, including the United States. On the contrary, at the same time, we are in bilateral talks to build a sustainable security relationship other than the economic, cultural, and scientific and social ties.
You say that ISIS is less of a threat, and yet on Friday, CENTCOM announced that a raid was conducted in western Iraq. U.S. military, alongside Iraqi security officials, killed some senior ISIS commanders. That tells me that the ISIS threat is still there.
No.
Of course, this was one of the quality operations that was executed between security agencies and the international coalition. This is proof that Daesh, or this is proof that the security agencies have reached a phase of capability where they started finding these people in caves, in mountains, in deserted areas, and kill them. This is proof of the level of ability and capability that our security forces have reached. Daesh today doesn't own a land or an area to be in and has lost its incubator, and this is the fundamental win achieved. Following up on the cells of these individuals doesn't mean that there is a real threat. When we used to talk about Daesh, Daesh used to hold areas, villages, and cities. And today, Daesh doesn't have this existence except for these isolated groupings in deserted areas.
There's a U.S. presidential election coming up very soon. What would you like to see out of the next U.S. president, be it President Harris or President Trump?
Of course, we respect the choice of the American people according to the democratic process. We will deal with any administration that gains confidence. It's of interest to us to activate the strategic framework that was signed in 2008 and building a relationship based on these principles of mutual interests and respecting Iraqi sovereignty.
Well, that was the Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia Al-Sudani speaking to Bloomberg's Jumana Bersace. Coming up, Bloomberg understands that Unicredit Chief Executive Andrea Orcel is seeking ECB permission to build a bigger stake in Commerzbank. We'll have all of the details, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Now, Unicredit is set to ask for regulatory permission to build a stake of up to 30% in Commerzbank as the chief executive, Andrea Orcel, pursues a possible takeover of the bank. Well, Bloomberg understands that the Italian lender will likely file the application to the ECB as soon as the next few days. So let's discuss all of this with Paul Davies from Bloomberg Opinion. Paul, you've been writing some really great columns trying to basically pick out, what happens next, why there's rationale for this merger to take place. What does happen next? I mean, is 30%, is it all or nothing that Orcel wants?
No, I think they're just giving themselves room and flexibility to buy shares opportunistically as they come up, either on the market or in the next round of sell down by the German government. I mean, we know from your interview with Andrea last week that he is keen to kind of, explore anything he can in terms of the opportunities here. So it might end up going, fairly high, fairly quickly, or they might sit on their hands and wait and see what happens with the price and see what else unfolds within Germany.
Within Germany is the key there. Does Deutsche Bank come in?
Well, they're obviously thinking about it. There's been a few stories about this around. I mean, they have to think about it, right? It's like it's somebody's going to create between HVB and Commerzbank, a major competitor to Deutsche within Germany, possibly even larger than Deutsche itself on the ground in Germany. Personally, I don't think Deutsche should get involved. I don't think they should try and buy Commerzbank. They've had incredible difficulty trying to integrate Postbank over a very long time. The analyst from Citigroup had a really good note out this morning talking about how the cost of capital for Deutsche would be higher than it would be for Unicredit, so they wouldn't get as good a return. And also the overlap in the branches is much, much greater. So you would see many more closures, probably a lot more redundancies and staff cuts if Deutsche took over than if Unicredit did. And that's not going to go down well politically in Germany either, despite the fact that unemployment is very low. And if you're ever going to do this sort of thing, now's maybe the time to do it.
Okay, a million more questions about what the politicians are thinking, so we'll have to get you back on. Paul, thank you so much. Paul Davies there from Bloomberg Opinion. Now, in the last 30 minutes, we also have a new team that's being proposed for Ursula von der Leyen. The EU Commission President has announced her new European commissioners. Now, remember, they still need to actually be approved by the European Parliament, and it's an extremely tricky situation. I mean, she probably spent weeks balancing some of these competing demands from political parties, the member states, as she tried to put together as this team team of nominees, but also new portfolios that would pass muster with governments and survive the scrutiny of the European Parliament. It does seem at first glance some of the key roles: Teresa Ribera, Spain's climate minister, who will oversee the digital and energy transition, including antitrust portfolios, Italy's European minister, and also France has been doing quite well, with the outgoing foreign minister set to be its nominee to replace the EU Internal Markets chief, Thierry Breton. Up next, to Bloomberg Brief, Danny Berger in New York, and this is Bloomberg.